Bosnia and Herzegovina, or how locals call it Bosnia and Herzegovina, is hands down one of the most beautiful countries you probably never thought about visiting. It is a place where you'll find mosques next to Catholic cathedrals, next to Orthodox churches, sometimes all on the same street. It is also a place where Ottoman heritage blends with the Austro-Hungarian architecture, where the coffee is incredible, the food is phenomenal, and the landscape looks like something out of Lord of the Rings. Three major ethnic groups, Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs, have called this place home for centuries. The cultural diversity here is genuinely impressive. But here's the thing that'll absolutely blow your mind about Bosnia. To govern a population of just 3.3 million people, roughly the population of Connecticut, Bosnia and Herzegovina has about 14 separate governments, 3 rotating presidents, more than 135 ministers, and about 660 to 670 parliamentarians. For context, Croatia, its western neighbor with a similar population, has just one government, about 150 MPs, while Bosnia has 14 governments and, as I said, close to 670 MPs. This is genuinely, empirically, measurably, practically the most complicated government system on planet Earth. And today we are going to understand why it exists, how it actually works, and why it is currently facing one of its biggest crises in 30 years. Welcome to the intersection, and let's break down Bosnia's labyrinth. Before we dive in, a quick context on why you should care about this. So, Bosnia and Herzegovina sits at the crossroads of Europe, literally between East and the West, between NATO and Russia's sphere of influence, between the EU and instability. The country itself is split in two large semi-autonomous entities, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Republika Srpska. Plus, there is one smaller self-governing district called Brčko. We'll dig into how this works later, but just for your information, these aren't just administrative regions. They are basically countries within a country, each with their own presidents, parliaments, and governments. And right now, one of those entity presidents has been convicted and removed from the office. He refused to leave, and he was backed by Russia, Serbia, and Hungary. It is a constitutional crisis that could destabilize the entire Western Balkans. Meanwhile, at the same time, half of young Bosnians are actually planning to leave the country. The system that kept peace for 30 years might be eating itself from within. So yeah, this matters, and let's go and understand how we got here. Alright, so let's start with the structure, and I'm gonna be real with you. This is going to sound a little bit insane, but stick with me because it all makes sense once you understand the history. At the very top, you got the state-level government of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but this is where it gets wild immediately. Bosnia does not have a president, it actually has 3 presidents simultaneously. One Bosniak, one Croat, and one Serb. Every 8 months, they rotate who's the chair. Right now, assuming its position in July of 2025, it is nominally a Croat, Komšić. But no single person speaks for the country. They have to agree on foreign policy, on military decisions, on appointing ambassadors, and so on. And all of it requires a consensus or a 2/3 vote. After that, you got a parliamentary assembly with 2 chambers. First, there is a House of Representatives with 42 members. And then there is also a House of Peoples with 15 members. 5 Bosniaks, 4 Croats, and 5 Serbs. But here's the kicker. Any ethnic group can invoke national interest veto and block any legislation that they think threatens them. And it has been established as a safeguard against tyranny, but it also creates legendary gridlock. The Council of Ministers, basically the cabinet or the government, oversees just 9 ministries. And that's it at the state level. By design, the state government is weak. Now, below the state level is where the things absolutely explode. So, as I said earlier, Bosnia is divided into 2 entities, basically semi-autonomous regions plus 1 special district. So let's talk about the bigger one first. The Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina takes about 51% of the territory. It has its own president, 2 vice presidents, it even has its own parliament with 2 chambers, its own prime minister, and 16 ministries with very strict ethnic quotas. The government itself contains 8 Bosniak ministers, 5 Croat ministers, and 3 Serb ministers. But it gets even crazier. The federation is further divided into 10 cantons. And each of those cantons has its own prime minister, its own assembly, its own cabinet with, I don't know, roughly between 6 to 12 different ministries, and control over education and police. And this control over education and police is fascinating. It means that a kid moving from one canton to another within the same entity might study a little bit of different history and will definitely live under a different police force, again within the same entity. The other smaller entity is called the Republika Srpska. It occupies 49% of the territory and is a bit more centralized. It has just one president, currently in crisis, but we'll get there. It has a 83-seat National Assembly, but that assembly also works with its own Council of Peoples. And there is also just one government with 16 ministries. It doesn't have internal subdivisions like federation, so there are no cantons. They are just regular municipalities. And lastly, there is Brčko district. It is a tiny northwestern corridor that is, you could say, co-owned by both entities and self-governed. It has a 31-seat assembly, and actually in comparison to Republika Srpska and Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, it functions pretty well. So let's try and count it all up. So again, there are 14 legislators within a single country with 2 entity parliaments and 10 cantonal assemblies plus Brčko. There are about 6 presidents or executive leaders, around 135 ministers and roughly 670 parliamentarians, 4 separate court systems, and 4 separate public finance systems. Bosnia, thanks to this, has roughly 5 to 7 more legislators per capita than its neighbors, and that comes with a cost. And that cost is 40.3% of GDP in government spending. That translates to about $1,300 per person flowing through this fragmented maze of overlapping bureaucracies. Now you're probably thinking, why in the hell would anyone design a system this complicated? And it's a great question. It is a really fair question. But the answer is actually really simple. This wasn't designed to be efficient. It was designed to stop war and genocide from happening again. So let's talk about Dayton. From roughly April 1992 to November 1995, Bosnia tore itself apart in Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II. Between 100,000 and 250,000 people died and over 2 million people were displaced, nearly half the population. The Srebrenica genocide alone killed more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys in July of 1995. In November 1995, negotiations happened at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. US diplomat Richard Holbrooke got 3 presidents who didn't really like each other into the same room. Alija Izetbegović for Bosnia and Herzegovina, Franjo Tuđman for Croatia, and Slobodan Milošević for Serbia. The actual Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadžić couldn't attend because he was already indicted for war crimes. Multiple peace plans have failed before this one because none of them gave all 3 groups sufficient guarantees of self-power. The war created ethnically cleansed territories through systematic violence. Before the war, Bosniaks were around 43.5% of the population, Serbs were around 31%, and Croats were around 80%, mixed throughout the country. After the war, the demographics were completely different. The federation became 70% Bosniak and 22% Croat, while Republika Srpska became 81% Serb. Almost 800,000 people never returned home. So the Dayton negotiators used something called consociational democracy. It is a framework for deeply divided societies developed by political scientist Aaron Leibhardt. The system relies on 4 main positions or principles. It's a grand coalition, mutual vetoes, proportional representation, and segmental autonomy. This system deliberately makes changing anything extremely difficult. It does so to prevent any group from dominating the other, but that also prevents basically anything else from happening, and as one UN official puts it, it's a bad peace to end a worse war. But here's the thing, for 30 years it worked. There has been no return to large-scale violence, and that is genuinely a success story. So we got this incredibly complex system designed to prevent conflict, but in practice, it prevents almost everything. So let me give you some genuinely wild examples of this dysfunction. In 2021 and 2022, Bosnia adopted zero state budgets for 16 consecutive months. The Republika Srpska representatives actually blocked the approval. All state institutions operated on temporary financing, meaning no new programs, no international agreements, and reforms being completely stalled. And the legislative output during this period? From 2021 to 2022, the Council of Ministers adopted not a single piece of legislation. Zero. The House of Representatives met only 4 times in 6 months, and the House of People twice. Do you remember that vital national interest veto I mentioned before? It is constantly being weaponized, and Dodik has used it to block Bosnia and Herzegovina's participation in international education assessments and even to stop Montenegro's president from visiting the Srebrenica genocide anniversary. For years, this was just business as usual. Gridlock, obstruction, institutional paralysis. But in 2025, something fundamentally changed. Right now, Bosnia is facing what international experts are calling its greatest existential threat since 1995. Meet Milorad Dodik. For years, he's been the president of Republika Srpska, the Serb entity we mentioned before. He openly advocated secession. He is corrupt and has been sanctioned by the US government since 2017. In February 2025, he was convicted of defying the International High Representative's decision. He was fined about 18,000 euros and banned from public office for 6 years. On August 6, the Central Election Commission officially revoked his mandate. On September 19, 2025, Vice President Davor Pranic, a 30-year-old orthopedic surgeon and the first ever Croat to serve as the Republika Srpska's president, formally assumed acting presidential powers, and snap elections are scheduled for November 23rd of 2025. But here's the problem. Dodik does not recognize any of this. He continually claims that he is a president, and he's not alone in his efforts. He is backed by Russia's Putin, Serbia's Vučić, and Hungary's Orban. At an April 2024 rally, he even declared, "We do not want to live in the same state with you, and we will not live in the same state with you." So taking this complexity in account, where does this system rank globally? Is it really the most complicated? Let's do a quick lightning round of other complicated systems. First up, Lebanon. 18 religious group, the confessional system is currently in the state of collapse, and the system entrenched divisions instead of bridging them. Then there is Belgium, with 7 parliaments, 6 governments, 3 linguistic communities, and 3 regions. It even set a world record with 541 days to form a government, but it is a functional, prosperous EU founding member. Let's talk Switzerland. Switzerland has 26 cantons, rotating 7-member federal council, but power sharing there comes from election results, not predetermined ethnic quotas. It is a success story enjoying a lasting peace since 1848. So with all this in mind, Bosnia has the strongest empirical claim to the most complicated government, based on government layers and overlapping jurisdictions, ethnic quota intricacy at all levels, multiple veto points, external oversight with legislative powers, which is unique globally, and it's something that we will talk about in another video, and asymmetric federalism. It is generally and genuinely the most Byzantine system on earth. So here's what we're looking at. Bosnia and Herzegovina's government is humanity's most elaborate experiment in preventing ethnic conflict through institutional design. And for 30 years, it actually succeeded in its primary mission, no return to war. And that is genuinely remarkable. Most post-genocide societies do not achieve that. But it did come at a cost. That cost is governmental paralysis, economic stagnation, endemic corruption, and catastrophic youth immigration hollowing out the country from within. The 2025 crisis with Dodik's Defiance, combined with half of young people planning to leave, suggests we are approaching a critical inflection point. The system can't reform because reform requires consensus from people whose power depends on blocking reform. It can't continue indefinitely either because demographic collapse and economic pressure will eventually force changes, and it can't easily dissolve because the international community is committed to territorial integrity. So Bosnia proves that preventing war and building functional democracy are entirely different challenges, sometimes even contradictory ones. This incredibly beautiful, culturally rich country with 3.5 million people needs 14 governments, 3 presidents, 136 ministers, and almost 700 parliamentarians just to maintain a fragile peace. And this complexity that prevented violence is now preventing progress. And when half of your young people would rather leave than navigate this Byzantine maze, you have to ask, can a system like this survive its own success? That's Bosnia's labyrinth. If you find this valuable, consider subscribing. We break down complex geopolitical systems, AI, technology, and intelligence topics just like this one. I'm curious, however, do you think that a power sharing system like this one are worth the dysfunction? Or is there a better way to handle deeply divided societies? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching The Intersection and stay curious.